Your body knows the hour without any clock. Years of rising before dawn have set a pattern that even a day of rest cannot break. Yet there is no urgency now, no hurried reaching for boots. You lie still for a while, feeling the weight of the wool blanket and the cool edge of the pillow, aware of the cottage around you wrapped in its own slumber. The walls of thick local stone hold the chill of the night, and the tiny window, a deep-set rectangle, shares a square of sky that is neither dark nor light, but something in between, the color of wood ash. Gradually you push the blanket aside and set your feet on the cold flagstones. The kitchen below is a single room with a low ceiling, its beams dark from decades of peat smoke. You strike a match and light the oil lamp, its flame a steady yellow teardrop that pushes the shadows into the corners. The range is still warm from the night before, its iron heart ticking softly as it cools. You shake down a few small coals from the scuttle and coax a new fire to life with thin sticks of kindling and a patient, gentle breath. The flame catches with a soft whump and a new, friendly warmth begins to spread. You dress slowly, piece by piece. The trousers are of heavy cotton drill, soft and faded to a pale olive from countless washings. The knees worn thin. The shirt is flannel, its collar frayed, the cuffs unbuttoned and loose. A waistcoat of old brown wool, missing one button, settles over your shoulders like a familiar hand. The boots are the last thing, sturdy leather with hobnails worn smooth, the laces supple and dark with oil. Each movement is quiet, unhurried, the small ritual performed in the milky light of the lamp and the growing glow from the range. At the wooden table, you prepare a simple meal. There is a loaf of dark bread, its crust thick and chewy, and you slice 2 pieces with a knife that has a blade thin from sharpening. You spread a thin scrape of salted butter, the butter pale and firm from the cool pantry. A pot of tea steeps on the edge of the range, the steam rising in a lazy ribbon, carrying the earthy, bitter scent of strong black leaves. You drink the tea from a heavy earthenware cup, its rim chipped, its surface crazed with a web of tiny cracks that have turned brown with age. The bread is chewy and slightly sour, the butter melting just a little. You eat without hurry, looking out the small window where the sky has now paled to the color of watered milk. The midday meal comes next, a small cloth bundle. You take a square of clean linen and place upon it more slices of dark bread, a wedge of firm white cheese, and a small wrinkled apple from the barrel in the pantry. The corners are folded neatly, tucked in, and the bundle is placed on the table beside your cap. A flat woolen cap of a dark, indefinite hue, shaped by years of wear to the exact contour of your head. Stepping outside is like stepping into a different element. The air in the cottage had been close and familiar, scented with tea and wood smoke and the faint, clean smell of stone. Outside, the air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet grass and stone, a scent that is both empty and full, the breath of the hills. You stand for a moment just outside the door, feeling the vast silence of the Welsh hills settle around you like a second coat. The lane is empty. The cottage doors along the row are all closed, their curtains still drawn. Even the birds are not yet in full chorus. A single blackbird is practicing a few low, liquid notes from the top of a chimney pot, then it falls quiet again. The world in front of you is a study in quiet greens and greys. The garden gate hangs slightly askew on its iron hinges, and you lift the latch with a familiar gritty scrape. Beyond the gate, the valley opens out. The fields slope away, parcelled by ancient dry stone walls that snake up the hillsides in long, wandering lines. These walls are grey, built of the same slaty stone that lies under everything here, their tops set with dark, thin pieces of slate, set on end like a rough, fossilized hedge. The grass in the fields is a pale winter green, still wet with dew, each blade holding a tiny crystal droplet that catches the slow-arriving light. Your feet find the path without thought, a track of packed earth and scattered slate chippings that leads away from the village and up towards the quarry. You do not take it yet. Instead, you pause by the low wall at the edge of the lane, looking out over the valley that seems to be slowly waking. A ribbon of river, not bright, but the color of dull pewter, winds through the valley bottom, its surface so still it reflects the pale sky like a mirror that needs polishing. On a far hill, a thin trail of smoke rises from an invisible chimney, a straight vertical wisp that climbs a little way before it is smoothed away into nothing. The only sound, apart from the soft sigh of an almost non-existent breeze, is the distant sound of water falling somewhere. A faint, continuous hiss that is so constant it becomes a kind of silence itself. You turn from the view and begin the slow walk up the lane towards the quarry path. The lane is narrow, bordered on both sides by high walls that are cushioned with thick moss of a deep, velvety emerald. The moss drinks the sound of your footsteps, absorbing the soft crunch of boot on grit. There is no one to see you pass. The Sunday quiet is a physical presence, a thick, soft blanket tucked over the entire valley, and you move through it with the ease of long practice. The sun has not yet climbed over the shoulder of the hill. The light is still that strange, directionless morning light, a pale, watery blue that washes all color to pastel. It touches the tips of the slate fences and makes them glint very faintly, a dull sheen like the skin of a fish. The clouds are high and thin, stretched across the sky like cords of pulled wool. They do not move. Nothing moves quickly. Not the clouds, not the light, not the shadow that still lies deep in the folds of the hills. Even the minute hand on the church clock, if you were to watch it, would seem to creep rather than tick. Your pace is steady, a slow and regular rhythm that matches the slow pulse of the morning. You feel the gentle stretch in your legs, the familiar way your boots grip the earth. The lane begins to rise almost imperceptibly, a gradual, gentle slope that tells your body you are leaving the level of the cottages and beginning the long, slow ascent into the upper reaches. The dry stone walls continue on either side, and at one point you pass a gate made of iron bars, rusted to a rich orange-brown, beyond which a field of coarse grass is dotted with a few white sheep. They stand motionless, their heads raised, watching you with blank yellow eyes. But they do not bleat, they just stand and watch, and you pass by, and they lower their heads again to the grass. The lane curves to the left, and now the view to the right opens out in a wide, sweeping panorama. You can see the whole village gathered below, a cluster of grey stone roofs, the slate tiles laid in neat, overlapping rows like the scales of a fish. The chapel is distinct, its small bell tower pointing upwards, its stone a slightly darker grey than the cottages. There are no lights in any windows now, the early sun having erased the need for lamps. The village looks like a small, quiet island, floating on a sea of green fields, and behind it, the valley wall rises in a steep, wooded slope, where the trees are a mix of bare winter branches and the dark, solid shapes of a few hardy pines. You pause here, not because you are tired, but because the scene invites pausing. You set your cloth bundle on the top of a gatepost, the stone cold and rough under your fingers. The only sound is the distant murmur of the waterfall, now a little clearer, a low, white noise that threads through the stillness. The blackbird that was on the chimney pot has now flown to a nearby hawthorn bush, its dark shape perched among the red berries and grey twigs. It sings again, a series of clear, fluted notes that seem to fall through the air like drops of water, each one separate and perfect. Then it stops, and the silence rushes back in, thicker than before. You could stay here for a long time, just watching the slow shift of light on the distant fields, the way a single cloud shadow glides across a pasture and turns the green to a deep, mossy tone before moving on. But the day has a purpose, even if it is a quiet, personal one, and after a few minutes you lift the bundle from the gatepost and continue on your way. The lane now runs alongside a small stream, a narrow channel of water that runs over a bed of smooth grey stones. The water is so clear it is almost invisible. You can see every pebble, every grain of sand, the dark, waving shapes of water weeds that sway very gently in the current. The sound of the stream is a constant liquid whisper, a sound that seems to talk to itself in a language made of soft consonants. The path to the quarry is just ahead, a wide, inclined ramp that cuts up the hillside to the left, and you turn onto it. This is the old tramway, its iron rails rusted and partly hidden by grass and dandelions. The sleepers below the rails are old timber, dark and damp, studded with small flat mushrooms of a pale buff color. The walking is a little more deliberate here, the slope increasing, and your breathing deepens just a fraction. You climb slowly, your boots finding the familiar footholds between the rails, your shadow now a long, stretched shape behind you, as the sun finally breaks free of the hilltop and pours a pale gold light across the land. The higher you go, the more the world below seems to rearrange itself. The cottages become smaller, their roofs merging into the patchwork of fields. The river becomes a thin silver line. The sound of the stream fades and is replaced by a new quality of quiet, a high, open silence that belongs to the sky and the rock. The air is noticeably cooler here, cleaner, with no hint of wood smoke, only the scent of damp stone and the faint mineral tang of the quarry itself, a smell like wet dust and old iron. The sun now fully illuminates the valley, and you see all the colors come alive. The green of the fields is not just one green but a tapestry of shades: olive green, grey-green, the bright emerald of a patch of new grass by a spring, the dark, almost black green of a clump of rushes. The dry stone walls cast thin, sharp shadows, revealing their intricate jigsaw pattern of interlocking stones, each one fitted by hand long ago. The sky above is a clear, soft blue, the clouds now little more than a few smudges on the horizon. You stop once to catch your breath, turning to look back at the panorama. From here you can see the whole of the valley's head, a great amphitheatre of hills. The quarry itself is hidden around a shoulder of rock, but you know it is there, a man-made step cut into the mountain. The Sunday silence is absolute up here. Even the birdsong is less frequent, the wind so light it barely stirs the dry grass stems beside the path. You can feel the day stretching out ahead of you, long and unhurried, full of the quiet rhythm of stone. You resume walking. The tramway curves around the shoulder of the hill, and suddenly the quarry floor comes into view. It is a wide, flat shelf cut into the mountainside, an immense open space of grey rock, and on this Sunday morning it is utterly without sound, struck dumb and waiting. You step onto the level ground, your boots crunching on the tiny fragments of waste slate that cover the floor like a carpet of broken tiles. The work sheds and the huge overhead cranes stand motionless, their iron arms dark against the sky. The great terraced walls rise in giant steps around you, their faces scarred with the marks of chisel and wedge. And there is a deep green pool of still water at the lowest point, reflecting the sky with such perfect stillness that the clouds seem to float beneath your feet. You stand in the center of this vast, silent amphitheater, and the quiet is so profound that you can hear your own heartbeat, a soft, steady thud in your ears. The sun is fully up now, but it brings no warmth, only a clean silver light that makes every detail of the rock stand out with sharp clarity. You look around, and for a long moment you simply breathe, taking in the scale and the silence, the thin, cool air. This is where your day will pass, in the company of a single block of slate and the simple tools of your trade. And for now, on the threshold of the work, there is only the quiet, the light, and the slow, steady beating of your own peaceful heart. The tramway begins where the lane bends sharply to the left, a wide, canted ramp that climbs the hillside in a long, straight line. The iron rails emerge from the packed earth like the weathered ribs of some old sleeping creature, their tops polished to a dull silver by years of wagon wheels, but now speckled with fine orange rust. Between the rails, coarse grass and dandelions have pushed their way through the dark timber sleepers, and each blade of grass holds a tiny crystal of dew that catches the pale morning light and shatters it into miniature rainbows. You step onto the incline, your boots finding the familiar footholds between the rusted rails. The surface underfoot is a mixture of packed earth and countless small, sharp fragments of waste slate, the chippings that have fallen from countless loads over the decades. They crunch with a dry, brittle sound, a quiet shattering that is the only noise, apart from the distant whisper of the stream now falling behind you. The worn leather of your boots is soft and pliable, shaped by years of walking over just such a surface, and you can feel through the thin soles the exact texture of the ground, the sharper points of freshly broken slate, the smoother, rounded pebbles of older waste, the springy give of a patch of thick moss that has colonized a dark, damp corner. The incline rises at a steady, gentle angle, no steeper than a chapel roof, and you settle into a slow, rhythmic pace that matches the quiet pulse of the morning. There is no need to hurry. The day stretches out ahead like the full length of the valley, wide and open and empty. Your breathing deepens by a fraction, your lungs drawing in the cool, clean air that tastes faintly of wet stone. The higher you climb, the more the world behind you begins to rearrange itself, the perspective shifting with each dozen steps so that the cottages of the village shrink and regroup into little grey boxes, their slate roofs overlapping like the scales of a fish. You pause not from any weariness, but from a quiet habit of observation, turning to look back at the valley that now lies spread out below. The morning mist has not yet fully risen. It lies in the valley bottom like a lake of white wool, thick and smooth, covering the course of the river and the lowest fields. Only the tops of the tallest trees poke through, their bare winter branches looking like dark, delicate etchings against the pale, vaporous surface. Above the mist, the hillsides rise in layers of muted green and grey, the dry stone walls running across them in long, wandering lines that seem from this height to be the stitchwork of some vast, ancient tapestry. The sun has now cleared the shoulder of the eastern ridge, and a soft golden light spills across the upper slopes, turning the dew-soaked grass to a shimmering carpet of light. You resume walking, your eyes now drawn to the details of the path itself and the rock face that rises on your left. The rock here is a dark blue-grey slate, its surface rough and fractured, marked with the long, straight scores of old drill holes. On this north-facing slope, the stone is almost perpetually damp, and it has become a garden of slow, patient life. There are lichens of many kinds, spreading in flat, circular patches that look like pale green paint, spilled and dried a century ago. Others are a bright, sulphur yellow, powdery to the touch, clinging to the most sheltered crevices. Still others are a deep, crusty orange as vivid as rust, forming intricate, branching patterns that resemble tiny frozen forests. You reach out as you pass and let your fingertips brush across a patch of the pale grey-green lichen, feeling its dry, slightly rough texture, like fine sandpaper that has been left out in the weather. In the deeper crevices of the rock face, where water seeps constantly from some hidden spring, delicate fronds of fern uncurl towards the light. They are a bright, tender green, so vivid against the dark stone that they seem almost to glow. Each frond is perfectly formed, a miniature, lacy fan, and the very tips are beaded with drops of clear water that tremble slightly as you pass, catching your shadow and holding it for a moment before letting it go. There are mosses too, thick and cushiony, a deep, velvety emerald that drinks the light and gives back a soft, muted glow. They grow in plump, rounded hummocks, and when you press a finger gently into one, it yields with a cool, damp springiness, releasing a faint, earthy scent, the smell of wet soil and old stone. The only sound, apart from the steady crunch of your own boots, is a small waterfall somewhere out of sight further up the hillside. It is not a loud, dramatic cascade, but a steady, soft hiss, a continuous white noise that threads through the stillness like a quiet breath. The water is invisible, hidden behind a screen of bare hawthorn and old, twisted rowan trees, but you can picture it clearly, a narrow silver ribbon of water sliding over a smooth, moss-covered lip of rock, falling a short distance into a dark, peaty pool before continuing its way down to the valley floor. The sound never varies in pitch or volume, a constant soothing presence that seems to wash away any stray thought, leaving only the awareness of the path, the air, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own heartbeat. As you climb higher, the air begins to change. It grows cooler, cleaner, losing the faint, homely scent of wood smoke and damp wall that clings to the village. Up here, the air has a thin, mineral quality, a faint tang of wet stone dust and old iron, the breath of the mountain itself. You feel it in your lungs with each inhalation, a cool, sharp clarity that makes the world seem sharper and more defined. The light too has changed. The sun is higher now, a pale silver disk behind a thin veil of high cloud, and it casts a clear, shadowless illumination that picks out every detail of the path with a quiet, even precision. The incline continues, straight and unrelenting, and you pass a series of old wooden sleepers that have rotted almost completely away, leaving only dark, fibrous hollows in the earth where the timber once lay. In one of these hollows, a small pool of clear water has gathered, perfectly still, reflecting a tiny upside-down square of pale sky. A single small insect, a water skater, rests on the surface, its long, thin legs making 4 delicate dimples in the tension of the water. You pause to look at it, watching its absolute stillness, the way the light reflects off its dark, glossy body. Then you move on, leaving the tiny pool and its quiet inhabitant to the peace of the morning. The path now curves very slightly to the right, hugging the contour of the hill, and the view to your right opens out into a wide, sweeping panorama of the entire valley head. The mist has thinned now, pulling apart into long, wispy strands that cling to the lower fields like delicate gauze. The river is visible again, a thin pewter ribbon winding through the patchwork of fields, its surface so still that it reflects the pale blue sky without a ripple. The distant fields are divided by the dark green lines of hedgerows, and here and there a single tree stands alone in a pasture, its bare branches spreading against the sky like the veins of a leaf. The whole scene is utterly silent, painted in soft muted colors, as still as a watercolor left to dry on a windowsill. You take another pause, leaning your shoulder lightly against the cool, damp rock face. The surface is cold even through the thickness of your flannel shirt and wool waistcoat, and the chill seeps slowly into your skin, a pleasant coolness that anchors you to the solid reality of the hill. You can feel the immense weight of the mountain above you, the thousands of tons of slate and earth pressing down through the ages, and yet here on the path everything is quiet and still, the only movement, the slow drift of a single cloud shadow across the distant fields. The cloud itself is a small, puffy shape, white as new wool, and its shadow glides across the green like a silent grey ghost, darkening a pasture for a moment before moving on and leaving the grass to brighten again. You push away from the rock and resume your climb. The sound of the hidden waterfall has faded now, replaced by a new quality of silence, a high, open stillness that belongs to the sky and the summit. The bird song has ceased entirely. Even the wind is too light to stir the dry brown fronds of last year's bracken that line the upper edge of the path. The bracken is a uniform, rusty brown, a dense, tangled mat that crackles faintly if you brush against it, releasing a faint, spicy scent of dried vegetation. Above the bracken, the hillside rises in a steep, grassy slope, the pale winter grass cropped short by sheep, and higher still, the rock breaks through in grey, angular outcrops, their edges sharp against the soft blue of the sky. Your legs feel the steady pull of the incline now, a gentle, pleasant ache in the muscles of your calves and thighs. It is a familiar sensation, the kind of tiredness that is not unpleasant, but rather a quiet confirmation of movement, of progress, made against the steady pull of the earth. You match your breathing to your steps, a slow 4-step rhythm that calms the mind and turns the walk into a kind of meditation. Inhale on the first 2 steps, exhale on the next 2, the cycle repeating endlessly, a quiet, internal tide. The path levels out for a short stretch, a brief, flat respite where the old tramway crosses a small level shoulder of the hill. Here the ground is wider, a broad, grassy shelf that looks out over the entire valley. You stop in the center of this open space, your bundle still tucked under your arm, and you stand for a long moment just looking. The village below is now a tiny cluster of grey roofs, no larger than a handful of scattered pebbles. The chapel, with its small square tower, is a dark grey rectangle among the lighter grey of the cottages. You cannot see any movement, any sign of life. The whole valley lies under the Sunday spell, as still and silent as a painting. The only evidence of the world beyond is the thin, straight trail of smoke that still rises from a distant chimney, a single, vertical line that climbs a little way before it is smoothed away into the pale air. After the flat shoulder, the path resumes its steady climb, now curving back to the left around a large, projecting outcrop of rock. The rock here is massive, a single smooth face of slate that rises 20 feet above the path, its surface dark and faintly gleaming with a thin film of moisture. The face is scarred with the straight, parallel lines of the slate's natural cleavage, thin, precise striations that run from top to bottom like the lines of a written page. You reach out and run your hand along one of these lines, feeling the cool, smooth surface, the almost imperceptible ridge where the next layer of stone waits to be split. The rock is cold, so cold it almost numbs your fingertips, and you pull your hand back and tuck it into the warmth of your pocket. The path now enters the shadow of the great outcrop, and the temperature drops by a noticeable degree. The air here is damp and still, heavy with the scent of wet stone. Moss grows thickly on the shaded side of the rock, a deep, lush carpet that hangs in soft green curtains. Water drips slowly from a crevice high above, each drop falling with a distinct, musical plink into a small, dark pool that is formed in a hollow at the base of the rock. The sound is solitary and rhythmic, a slow, steady metronome that marks the passing seconds with quiet, liquid precision. You pause to watch a single drop form, a tiny globe of water that swells and stretches and finally lets go, falling through the still air before it merges silently with the dark surface of the pool. You emerge from the shadow into the full light again, and immediately the air warms by a degree. The path makes one final, gentle curve, and then, quite suddenly, the incline levels out and the whole, wide, open shelf of the quarry floor opens before you. It is a vast, man-made amphitheatre of grey rock, its floor covered with the same fine, broken chippings that have crunched under your boots for the entire climb. The great terraced walls rise in giant steps on three sides, their faces scarred and marked by decades of labour. The huge overhead cranes stand motionless, their dark iron arms outstretched against the soft blue of the sky, and at the lowest point, a deep green pool of still water reflects the clouds with such perfect clarity that the sky seems to lie beneath your feet, silent and depthless. You step onto the quarry floor, and the Sunday silence closes around you like a gentle hand. The high, open space is utterly without movement or sound, a bowl of stillness suspended between the earth and the pale morning sky, waiting for the slow, quiet rhythm of the day to begin. The quarry floor opens around you like a vast, grey room without a roof, its walls the high, terraced faces of the mountain itself. You step from the dirt path of the tramway onto the level ground, and immediately the sound of your boots changes. The soft, packed earth gives way to a carpet of broken slate chippings, millions of small, angular fragments that cover the entire floor to a depth of several inches. They are of every size, from fine, silvery dust that puffs up around your ankles, to flat, blade-like pieces as long as your hand, their edges sharp enough to scratch the leather of your boots if you were to drag your feet. The fragments shift and settle under your weight with a dry, brittle crunching, a sound that is both flat and immediate in the wide, open air, swallowed almost at once by the immense silence. You stand still for a moment, letting the quiet settle over you. The quarry on this Sunday morning is a place of suspended industry, a vast, man-made amphitheatre where all the noise and motion of the working week has been paused. The great overhead cranes, huge structures of riveted iron and thick hemp ropes, stand motionless against the pale sky, their long horizontal arms jutting out over the quarry floor like the branches of some skeletal tree. The pulleys and hooks at the ends of the ropes hang perfectly still, not even the faintest breeze stirring them, and the iron surfaces are darkened with a fine coating of rust and old grease. There is no creak of straining cable, no shout of a banksman, no grinding rumble of the wagons. The cranes are simply standing, waiting, as silent as the rock they once lifted. Around the perimeter of the floor, stacks of finished roofing slates are arranged in neat, orderly piles. Each stack is perhaps 4 feet high, the slates lying flat one atop the other, their edges perfectly aligned. The whole pile is square and precise as a stone block. The slates are of that distinctive blue-grey colour, a colour that shifts with the light, now dark as a storm cloud, now pale as wood smoke. The surfaces are smooth and faintly lustrous, and in the quiet light of the overcast morning, they seem to absorb the illumination without reflecting it, holding a soft, muted glow. There are many such stacks, dozens of them, arranged in long rows that stretch back towards the quarry face, each one representing many hours of patient, methodical work, and now they sit like silent sentinels, waiting to be loaded onto wagons and taken down the tramway to the world below. Wheeled huts, small wooden structures on iron wheels, have been pushed to the edges of the floor. These are the shelters where the quarrymen take their midday meal and store their tools during the working week. But today, their doors are closed and their small square windows are dark. They look like little cabins that have been set adrift on a sea of grey chippings, their wood weathered to a silvery grey that blends with the stone. The wheels are half buried in the slate waste, the iron rims showing spots of bright orange rust. You begin to walk across the quarry floor, your boots crunching rhythmically, the sound forming a slow, steady beat that measures your progress. The space is so large that your footsteps seem small and insignificant, a tiny, local noise in the midst of a great, engulfing quiet. To your left, the main quarry face rises in a series of enormous steps, each step a terrace, perhaps 20 feet high. Their vertical walls marked with the long, straight lines of drill holes and the deeper, wider grooves left by wedges. The rock face is not uniform. It varies in color from dark, almost black shale to lighter bands of a silvery blue, and in places there are veins of white quartz running through the stone like frozen lightning. The terraces are connected by rough paths of loose stone, and here and there a single abandoned crowbar leans against the rock, left from the previous workday, its iron shaft now cool and damp to the touch. To your right, the quarry floor slopes gently downwards, and at its lowest point lies a deep, green pool of still water. This pool has collected over the years from rain and natural springs, filling the bottom of an old working, and its surface is so perfectly unmoving that it reflects the sky with absolute fidelity. The pale, high clouds drift slowly across the reflected surface, so clear and sharp that the pool seems like a second sky lying on the earth. The water is a deep, cold green, the color of a holly leaf, and near the edges you can see the sloping sides of the pool, the submerged slate blocks that have tumbled in and now lie in a jumble under the water, their surfaces coated with a dark, velvety algae. No bird flies over the pool, no insect disturbs its surface. It is as still as a mirror that has been forgotten. The air is cool and clean, with that faint mineral tang you noticed on the climb, the smell of whetstone dust and old iron. The high walls of the quarry trap the air and hold it still, so that nothing moves, not the smallest breeze, not a single blade of the dry brown grass that clings to the edges of the terraces. The only sensation of movement is the slow, imperceptible drift of the clouds far above, and even they seem to be barely creeping, as if time itself has been stretched thin by the Sunday calm. You make your way towards a corner of the quarry floor, a small, familiar workspace that is set apart from the main area, tucked against the base of one of the lower terraces. Here, the floor has been leveled to a smooth, flat surface and a low wooden bed. A heavy framework of old timbers has been built to hold the large blocks of raw slate. On this bed rests a single, substantial block of stone, and this is the reason for your quiet, personal journey up the hill on this day of rest. You selected this block on Saturday, in the final hour of the working week, and you have been thinking about it in the back of your mind through the quiet evening and the long, peaceful sleep, knowing that it waited for you here, in the silence, patient and unmoving. You approach the wooden bed and stand for a moment looking at the block. It is a large piece of raw slate, perhaps 6 feet in length, 4 feet wide, at a good foot in thickness. The rock is of a fine, even quality, a deep blue-grey with a faint, silvery bloom on the surface. The top surface is slightly rough, not polished or smooth, and a fine powdery residue, the dust of the quarry, clings to the tiny irregularities of the stone. When you run a finger across it, the dust comes away on your skin, leaving a pale grey smear that feels dry and cool, like the ash from a long-dead fire. The edges of the block are sharp and clean, cut square by the saws on Saturday, the corners so precise they could be used as a straight edge. Down the sides, you can see the barely visible diagonal grain lines, the cleavage planes that are the secret of the slate. They run through the stone at a slight angle, fine as hairs, marked by a faint change in the color of the rock, a subtle shift from dark to slightly lighter grey. These lines are the hidden map you will follow with your chisel and mallet, the ancient invisible layering that was set down on a seafloor millions of years ago when the rock was only soft mud settling in quiet, dark water. The wooden bed on which the block rests is sturdy and low, built from thick, squared timbers that have been darkened and smoothed by years of use. The timbers are oil-stained and scarred with the marks of countless chisel cuts, and they give off a faint, warm scent of old wood and machine oil. The block sits solidly on the bed, its immense weight pressing down so that the whole structure feels as permanent and immovable as the mountain itself. You turn to a small wooden locker that stands against the quarry wall nearby, a simple, sturdy box of planks fitted with a hinged lid and an iron hasp. The wood is grey and weathered, but the lid lifts easily, the iron hinge giving a soft, low groan that is the loudest sound you have heard since you entered the quarry. Inside the locker, your tools lie in their familiar places, each one resting in a shaped wooden cradle. You reach in and take them out one by one. The first is the mallet. It is a long-handled tool, the shaft made of smooth, pale hickory that has been polished to a warm, golden brown by the sweat of your hands over the years. The handle is slightly curved, shaped to fit the grip, and it has a pleasant, solid weight, heavy enough to do the work, but balanced so that it feels like an extension of your arm. The head of the mallet is a cylinder of tough beech wood, bound at each end with iron rings to keep it from splitting. The wood of the head is a darker brown, almost the color of coffee, and it is dented and marked from thousands of impacts, each tiny depression a record of a single, precise blow. You run your thumb over one of the iron rings, feeling the slight roughness of ancient rust, the cool, hard metal under your skin. Next, you take out the chisels. They are wide and flat, quite unlike the narrow, pointed chisels of a carpenter. These are Slater's chisels, their blades flaring out into broad, fan-shaped edges that are designed to slide into the hairline seams of the stone and split it along its natural grain. There are several of them, each a slightly different width, and each one has a blade of fine polished steel that gleams dully in the soft light. The edges are sharp, honed with care, and they are perfectly straight, without any nicks or rolls. The chisels have short wooden handles, similar to the mallet handle but thicker, shaped to fit the palm when you hold the blade in place and wait for the mallet's strike. You lay the tools out on the ground beside the wooden bed, arranging them in a neat row on a patch of clean, flat chippings. The chisels are placed in order of width, from the narrowest to the widest. Their steel blades are lined, the wooden handles resting on the stone. The mallet lies beside them, its head on the ground, its long handle pointing away. As you lay them out, you pick up each chisel in turn and hold it up to the light, squinting along the edge to check for any tiny imperfection, any minute roll or dull spot that might snag on the stone. The edge of the first chisel is flawless, a line of bright steel so fine it is almost invisible. You breathe on it and watch the tiny cloud of condensation form and then fade, leaving the metal unchanged. The second chisel is equally perfect, its edge glinting in the pale light. The third has a very slight burr along one corner, a tiny raised lip of metal that you can feel with the pad of your thumb, and you make a small mental note to touch it up with the whetstone later before it is needed. But for now, it will serve. The inspection is slow and methodical, a quiet ritual of preparation that you perform without thought, your hands moving with the ease of long practice. The valley below remains utterly silent, a hushed observer beyond the rim of the quarry. From up here you cannot hear the stream or the distant waterfall. The high walls block all sound from the lower world. The only noises are those you make yourself, the soft, dry crunch of your boots on the slate chippings, the almost inaudible whisper of your own breathing, the tiny metallic click as you set each chisel down on the stone. These sounds are so small that they seem to be absorbed by the immense open space, swallowed up and silenced almost before they can be heard. It is a quiet that feels old and deep, a quiet that has existed in these hills long before the quarry was cut and will remain long after. You finish laying out the tools and stand back, surveying your small workspace, the wooden bed with its single waiting block, the neat row of chisels like silver keys on the grey ground, the long mallet resting beside them. All of it seems to exist in a small, clear bubble of stillness within the greater stillness of the quarry. You take a slow, deep breath, drawing the cool, mineral air into your lungs, and then you reach for the small tin cup that sits on the corner of the locker. You pour a little water from a canvas-covered bottle, just enough to wet your fingers, and you turn towards the block, ready to begin the slow, patient work of reading the stone. But first, you stand for one more long, quiet moment, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the day in the peace of the empty quarry, before you crouch down beside the block and let your fingertips rest on the cool, rough surface, searching for the hidden line that will open the rock, like the page of an ancient book. The block waits on its wooden bed, patient and still, a rectangular mass of ancient mudstone that has not moved in a million years. You crouch down beside it, feeling the familiar ache in your knees as they press against the cool, sharp chippings of the quarry floor. The air around the block is cool and still, carrying that faint mineral scent you have known all your life, the dry, clean smell of stone that has never been warmed by the sun. You rest your fingertips on the rough top surface, feeling the tiny irregularities of the stone, the microscopic ridges and valleys that are invisible to the eye but clear to the touch. The slate is cold, so cold it seems to draw the warmth from your skin, and you let your hand rest there for a long moment, waiting for the stone to accept your presence. Reading the grain of slate is not a skill that can be rushed. It is a slow, patient conversation between the hands and the rock, a quiet dialogue that takes place in the realm of tiny sensations. You begin by circling the block slowly, your boots crunching softly on the slate chippings, your eyes tracing the surface of the stone from every angle. Sometimes you crouch low, bringing your face close to the side of the block so that you can see the faint, diagonal lines of cleavage that run through the stone. Sometimes you lean over from above, letting the pale morning light fall across the top surface so that the subtle variations in color and texture become visible. The block reveals itself gradually, and you are in no hurry to ask it any questions before it is ready to answer. The first thing you do is wet your thumb. You reach for the small tin cup that sits on the corner of the wooden locker, a battered, dented vessel that once held condensed milk and now serves as your water dipper. You dip your thumb into the cool water, feeling the shock of the cold against your skin, and then you press the wet pad firmly against the side of the block. You draw your thumb downwards in a slow, straight line, leaving a dark, glistening trail of moisture on the surface of the stone. The water darkens the slate immediately, turning the pale, dusty grey to a deep, rich blue-grey, the color of a winter sea. And as you watch, the moisture begins to evaporate, the dark trail slowly fading back to pale grey, but in the moments before it vanishes, it reveals the secret structure of the rock. The water evaporates faster from the denser, harder layers of the stone and lingers a little longer in the softer, more porous planes between them. This differential drying creates a faint, ghostly map on the surface of the slate, a pattern of barely visible lines and striations that tell you where the stone wants to split. You lean in close, your breath forming a tiny cloud on the cool surface, and you study these lines with the patient attention of a scholar reading an ancient manuscript. The lines are fine as hairs, running through the stone at a slight angle, and they are perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, the record of layer after layer of mud that settled on a primeval seafloor, each layer compressed by the weight of all the layers above until the soft sediment became hard, cleavable rock. You move around the block and repeat the process on another side, wetting your thumb and drawing it down the stone, watching the moisture reveal the hidden grain. Each side of the block tells the same story, the same parallel lines running through the dark grey stone, but from different angles you can see how the grain shifts and tilts, rising slightly towards one corner, dipping gently towards another. This is the knowledge you need, the exact angle and orientation of the cleavage plane, the invisible architecture that will guide your chisel and mallet. If you strike with the grain, the stone will split cleanly into smooth, flat sheets. If you strike against it, the stone will shatter into useless fragments. The difference is measured in fractions of a degree, and you've spent decades learning to read these tiny signs. You take a small, blunt chisel from the row of tools, a sturdy piece with a square edge that is not meant for splitting, but for testing. You hold it lightly in your hand, the wooden handle cool and smooth, and you begin to tap very gently along the top edge of the block. Each tap is a small, precise motion of the wrist, barely enough force to make a sound. The chisel strikes the stone with a tiny metallic click, and you listen carefully to the note that the stone returns. You move the chisel along the edge an inch at a time, tapping, listening, tapping again. In some places the sound is a dull, solid thud, a short, dead noise that tells you the stone is monolithic and unbroken at that point. In other places the sound is a slightly brighter ringing note, a faint, high overtone that indicates a hidden crack or a vein of harder quartz running through the slate. These are the imperfections you must avoid, the traps that could ruin a clean split and send the fracture running across the face of a perfect roofing slate. You work your way along the entire top edge, the tapping and listening continuing in a slow, methodical rhythm. The sound of each tap is small and flat, swallowed immediately by the immense silence of the quarry, leaving no echo, no lingering reverberation. It is a private sound, just you and the stone in quiet consultation, the tap of the chisel as intimate as a whispered question. The sun has climbed a little higher now, though it is still hidden behind the high, thin veil of cloud, and the light in the quarry has brightened to a clear, even illumination that casts no shadows. Every detail of the block is visible in this light. The fine, powdery dust that clings to the surface, the sharp, clean edges where the saws cut on Saturday, the faint, silvery sheen that appears when you tilt your head and catch the light at a particular angle. You pause in your tapping and take a step back, surveying the block as a whole. You've now gathered all the information the stone can give you: the direction of the grain, the angle of the cleavage, the location of any small flaws or hard spots. In your mind, you can see the thin, flat sheets of roofing slate that lie hidden inside this rough, rectangular block, each sheet separated from its neighbor by a plane of near-invisible weakness. The block could yield perhaps 20 good slates, perhaps more, depending on how cleanly it splits, how evenly the layers separate. You will not know for certain until the first sheet lifts free, but you have done this work so many times that your hands understand the stone better than your conscious mind. The knowledge is in the muscles, in the calloused fingertips, in the ears that can hear the difference between a solid thud and a ringing note. Now you focus your attention on a particular spot on the top edge of the block, a point where the grain lines run closest to the surface and the stone has given back the brightest, most promising note under your tapping. This is the corner where you will set the first chisel, the place where the stone is most willing to open. Tiny, almost invisible seam, a hairline fissure that runs along the cleavage plane, just wide enough to admit the thin edge of a splitting chisel. You trace the seam with the tip of your smallest finger, feeling the faint, sharp ridge where the next layer of stone presses against the one above it. The seam is so fine that if you were not looking for it, if you did not know exactly what to search for, you would never see it at all. But your eyes, trained by decades of looking, can see it as clearly as a drawn line. You set the blunt testing chisel aside and pick up the first of the splitting chisels, a thin blade of polished steel that flares into a wide, fan-shaped edge. The blade is perhaps 4 inches across at its widest point, the edge honed to a fine, straight line that gleams dully in the soft light. You hold the chisel in your left hand, your fingers wrapped around the short wooden handle, and you bring the edge to the tiny seam on the corner of the block. The steel touches the stone with a faint, metallic click, and you adjust the angle very slightly, tilting the blade until it aligns perfectly with the cleavage plane. This alignment is the most critical part of the entire process. If the angle is off by even a fraction of a degree, the mallet's blow will not travel true through the stone, and the split will wander, ruining the slate. But your hands know the correct angle without any conscious thought, and the chisel settles into the seam as naturally as a key sliding into a well-worn lock. You do not strike yet. Instead, you hold the chisel steady and take a slow, deep breath, letting your shoulders relax, letting the tension drain from your arms. The work of splitting slate is not about force, it is about patience, about the slow, steady application of gentle, repeated taps that coax the stone apart along its natural lines. The mallet lies beside you on the ground, its long hickory handle waiting for your grip, its heavy beech head dented and scarred from countless strikes. The iron rings that bind the head are cool to the touch, darkened with old rust and the faint oily residue of hands. You reach for the mallet, your fingers wrapping around the smooth, polished handle, and you lift it from the ground, feeling its solid, balanced weight. The handle fits your palm perfectly, shaped by years of use to the exact contour of your grip, and the mallet feels like an extension of your arm, a tool that has become part of your body through long, slow familiarity. You position yourself to the side of the block, your body angled so that you can see both the chisel edge and the surface of the stone. Your feet are planted firmly on the slate chippings, your knees slightly bent, your back straight. The first strikes of the mallet will not be forceful blows, but small, rhythmic taps, a series of 10 or 12 identical little clicks as the chiseled edge is coaxed into the stone like a key being turned very slowly. But you are not yet ready to begin. First you must stand here for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the mallet, the coolness of the air, the immense patient silence of the quarry around you. The block waits, the chisel waits, the morning waits, and you wait with them, suspended in the quiet, unhurried rhythm of a Sunday that asks for nothing but your steady, calm attention. The mallet hangs at your side, its weight a familiar, solid presence that pulls gently at your shoulder. You do not lift it yet. You stand beside the block, the thin edge of the spitting chisel resting in the invisible seam, and you take a long, slow moment to settle into the stillness. The quarry around you is a vast bowl of silence, the high walls holding the cool morning air as still as water in a deep well. The only movement is the slow, imperceptible drift of the pale clouds above, and even they seem to have paused to watch. Your breathing is slow and even, each inhalation drawing the clean mineral air deep into your lungs, each exhalation a soft, quiet sigh that barely stirs the fine dust on the surface of the stone. You lift the mallet now, your arm moving without hurry, the motion as smooth and practiced as the swing of a pendulum. The handle is a length of straight hickory, pale golden brown, its surface polished to a soft gleam by the sweat and friction of countless hours. The grain of the wood is visible as a series of fine parallel lines that run the length of the shaft, each line a record of a year of growth in some distant forest. There is a small dark knot near the base of the handle, a tiny oval blemish that you have rubbed with your thumb so many times it has become as smooth as polished horn. The handle tapers slightly towards the head, flaring out again where it meets the iron ring, and the balance of the tool is such that it rests in your grip with an almost liquid ease, as if it were an extension of your own arm. The head of the mallet is a cylinder of tough, close-grained beech, a wood that is hard and heavy, but not brittle, capable of striking steel thousands of times without splitting. The wood of the head is a darker brown than the handle, the color of rich, dark coffee, and it is dented all over with the marks of innumerable impacts. Each dent is a tiny, shallow crater, some round, some irregular, and together they form a texture like the surface of an old cobblestone. The ends of the cylinder are bound with iron rings, hammered on hot so that they grip the wood with unyielding pressure. The iron is dark and mottled, patched with a fine orange rust that has been smoothed down by the constant friction of use until it feels almost silky under the thumb. There is a faint, metallic smell to the mallet head, the scent of old iron and ancient wood, a smell that is as familiar to you as the scent of your own kitchen. You adjust your grip on the handle, your fingers wrapping around the smooth wood with a light, firm hold. Your thumb rests along the top of the shaft, guiding the direction of the strike, while your other fingers curl underneath, their calloused pads pressing into the polished surface. You do not grip the mallet tightly. A tight grip would transfer the shock of the strike up into your wrist and arm, creating fatigue and ruining the accuracy of the blow. Instead, you hold it loosely, letting the weight of the head do the work, your hand merely guiding the fall. This is a lesson you learned many years ago, in the first months of your apprenticeship, when your forearms would ache at the end of the day and the old quarrymen would shake their heads and tell you to let the hammer fall, not to force it. You raise the mallet a few inches, testing the weight, feeling the balance. The head rises and falls with a gentle, controlled motion, and then you bring it down to touch the end of the chisel handle very lightly, just a kiss of wood on wood to confirm the alignment. The chisel handle is short and thick, made of the same pale hickory, and it has a flat, slightly mushroomed top where the mallet strikes. The steel blade of the chisel disappears into the hairline seam on the corner of the block, its wide, fan-shaped edge wedged into the invisible opening. You check the angle one more time, leaning in close, your eyes tracing the line of the chisel blade to ensure it matches the cleavage plane of the stone. The alignment is perfect, the blade lying exactly along the grain, and you are ready to begin. The first strike is not a blow at all, but a tap, a single, gentle impact that produces a small, clean click. The sound is sharp and brief, a tiny note that hangs in the still air for a fraction of a second before it is swallowed by the vast silence of the quarry. You feel the shock of the strike travel up through the mallet handle, a tiny, high-frequency vibration that tingles against your palm, and you see the chisel blade settle a fraction of a millimeter deeper into the seam. The stone does not crack, it simply accepts the steel, opening a tiny, almost imperceptible amount as if it were drawing a slow, quiet breath. You wait. This is the rhythm of the work, a tap then a pause, then another tap. The pause is as important as the strike. It gives the stone time to absorb the shock, time for the tiny vibrations to travel along the cleavage plane and do their slow, invisible work. Rushing would create heat and stress, building up a resistance in the stone that would eventually cause it to shatter or split unevenly. Instead, you work at the stone's pace, not your own, matching your rhythm to the slow, ancient tempo of the rock. The second tap is identical to the first, the same gentle lift of the mallet, the same controlled fall, the same small, clean click. The chisel settles a little deeper. A tiny puff of slate dust, so fine it is almost invisible, drifts up from the seam and settles on the surface of the block. The dust is a pale silvery grey, catching the soft light as it floats, and then it settles into the microscopic irregularities of the stone, adding another layer to the fine, powdery residue that already covers the surface. You settle into a steady pattern now, a rhythm of 3 taps followed by a pause, 3 taps and a pause. The taps are not identical, but very nearly so, each one a small, precise motion of the wrist that lifts the mallet an inch or two and lets it fall under its own weight. The sound of the 3 taps forms a tiny, quiet phrase, a musical figure of 3 short notes, and the pause that follows is the rest, the silence between the phrases. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. The pattern repeats over and over, as steady as the ticking of a clock. And as you work, you feel your breathing synchronize with the rhythm, your whole body settling into the slow, meditative cadence of the mallet. The chisel moves deeper into the stone with each series of taps, its progress almost imperceptible, but steady. You watch the blade as it sinks into the seam, the polished steel gradually disappearing, the wide, fan-shaped edge becoming a thin, dark line embedded in the grey rock. The seam opens up ahead of the blade, a hairline shadow that extends a little further along the edge of the block with each series of strikes. This opening is the start of the split, the beginning of the separation between the top layer and the body of the block, and it travels along the cleavage plane with the slow, inevitable motion of a tide rising up a beach. You pause for a longer moment and shift your position slightly, moving your feet on the slate chippings, adjusting your stance. You are still working on the corner of the block, the chisel having penetrated perhaps half an inch into the stone, and now you gently withdraw the blade from the seam. It comes out with a soft scraping sound, the steel sliding free from the stone, and you inspect the edge for any sign of damage. The edge is still straight and sharp, showing only a faint grey smear of slate dust. You wipe the blade on the leg of your trousers, leaving a pale grey streak on the worn cotton, and then you reposition the chisel an inch further along the edge, finding the continuation of the seam where the split has not yet reached. The mallet resumes its rhythm, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The sound of the tapping is flat and immediate in the open air, not loud enough to echo, not sharp enough to startle. It is a sound that belongs to this place, a quiet workman-like noise that blends with the silence rather than breaking it. You have heard this sound since you were a boy, sitting on the quarry edge and watching the old men work, and it has always seemed to you like the heartbeat of the mountain, a slow, steady pulse that measures out the hours of the day. The seam continues to open, extending now along the entire end of the block, a fine dark line that marks the boundary between the top layer and the body of the stone. You move the chisel along methodically, an inch at a time, always placing the blade into the crack that has already started and working it deeper, coaxing the opening forward. The slate gives way with a series of tiny, soft crackling sounds, the noise of microscopic bonds breaking deep inside the stone, a sound so faint you can only hear it if you lean in close. It is like the sound of thin ice cracking under a distant weight, a delicate, brittle noise that speaks of immense pressures being slowly released. As the seam opens wider, you switch to a broader chisel, one with a wider blade that can span more of the opening. The new chisel is heavier, its steel blade perhaps 6 inches across, and you set it into the seam at the center of the block's end, where the gap is now visible as a dark, narrow mouth. The mallet strikes this broader chisel with the same gentle 3-tap rhythm, and the sound changes, becoming a slightly lower, more solid thud. The wider blade distributes the force more evenly, pushing the top layer upward with a steady, even pressure, and you can see the hairline shadow along the side of the block begin to deepen, the gap widening from a crack into a visible fissure. A fine silvery dust sifts down from the opening, gathering in a small, neat pile on the wooden bed below. The dust is the residue of the cleavage plane, the tiny particles of slate that have been ground free by the passage of the chisel. It is soft and fine, like talcum powder, and it sparkles faintly in the pale light, catching the tiny, flat crystals of mica that are mixed with the dark slate particles. You pause and run a finger through the pile, feeling the cool, silky texture, the way the dust clings to the ridges of your fingerprint. Then you brush your hand on your trousers and resume the work. The sun has continued its slow climb, though it remains hidden behind the high, thin cloud, and the light in the quarry has shifted almost imperceptibly, the illumination now falling at a slightly steeper angle. The shadows, never deep in this soft, diffuse light, have barely changed, but you can sense the passage of time in the quality of the air, the way the cool of the morning has given way to a very slight, almost unnoticeable warmth. The stone under your hands is still cold, still drawing the heat from your skin, but the air around you is just a fraction less chill, and you feel a tiny bead of sweat on your forehead, the first sign of the slow, steady exertion of the work. You pause and straighten up, arching your back to ease the subtle tightness that has gathered between your shoulder blades. Your hands rest on the mallet handle, the head of the tool resting on the wooden bed, and you look out across the quarry floor. The stacks of finished slates are still there, silent and orderly. The cranes are still motionless, their iron arms dark against the pale sky. The green pool at the bottom of the quarry is still perfectly mirror-like, its surface unbroken by any ripple. The world below is still wrapped in its Sunday quiet, and the only sound is the faint, distant hiss of the hidden waterfall, a sound so constant it has become a kind of silence itself. You turn back to the block. The seam is now open along the entire width of the stone, a dark, even fissure that runs from one side to the other. The top layer of slate, perhaps an inch thick, is now separated from the body of the block along its entire length, held in place only by the friction of its own weight and the slight, natural adhesion of the stone. You set the mallet down on the wooden bed, the handle resting against the block, and you crouch down to look at the fissure from the side. The opening is almost perfectly straight, following the cleavage plane with a precision that is deeply satisfying, a clean, even line that promises a good split and a perfect sheet of roofing slate. You retrieve the mallet and select another chisel from the row, this one a wedge-shaped tool that is thicker and heavier, designed not for the initial opening, but for the deeper, wider work of prying the layers apart. You insert the wedge into the fissure at the far end of the block, tapping it gently into place with a few soft strikes, and then you move to the other end and insert a second wedge. The wedges sit in the opening like steel teeth, their thick, angled blades pressing up against the underside of the top layer, and you begin to tap each wedge in turn, a few taps on one, then a few taps on the other, working your way back and forth along the block. The sound of the mallet on the wedges is deeper and duller, a solid wooden thunk that resonates through the stone. With each circuit of taps, the wedges sink a little deeper, and the top layer lifts a little higher, the gap widening from a fissure into a distinct opening. A long, low creaking sound begins, a noise that seems to come from deep inside the stone, part the straining of the rock and part the groaning of the wooden bed underneath. The sound is quiet, barely audible, but it fills the air with a slow, continuous tension, the voice of the stone as it yields. You listen to this sound with an attentive ear, monitoring the progress of the split, listening for any sudden change that might indicate a crack running off course. But the sound is steady and even, a slow, smooth progression, and you continue to work the wedges deeper. The gap is now wide enough to admit the thin blade of a larger pry bar, and you set the mallet aside and take up a long, flat bar of iron that lies beside the locker. The bar is heavy and cool, its surface darkened with age and polished smooth by handling. You slide the flat end into the opening, working it in carefully, feeling the resistance of the stone, and then you lean gently on the bar, applying a slow, steady prying pressure. The top layer of slate lifts with a soft, grinding sound, the two surfaces sliding apart, and you feel the sudden, slight release as the adhesion breaks and the sheet of stone comes completely free. It is a quiet, gentle moment, no dramatic crack, no sudden break, just the smooth separation of two surfaces that have been pressed together since before there were men to split them. You slide wooden rollers under the freed slab and ease it off to one side, revealing the new, untouched face of the remaining block beneath. This surface is smooth and perfectly flat, glistening with a faint, natural moisture, marked only by the delicate, fern-like patterns of ancient oxidation. You stand back and look at it, breathing slowly, the mallet resting once more at your side, and the quiet of the quarry settles around you again, deep and complete and patient. The freed slab of slate rests on the wooden rollers, a thin rectangular sheet of dark grey stone that now lies separate from the parent block. You stand back for a moment, your breath slow and even, the mallet hanging loose in your grip. The slab is perhaps an inch thick, its surface smooth and flat, still holding the faint, natural moisture that was trapped between the layers. This moisture gives the stone a soft, muted gleam, a subtle luster that catches the pale morning light and returns it as a deep, quiet glow. The edges of the slab are sharp and clean, exactly following the cleavage plane you traced with your chisel, and the corners are as square as if they had been measured with a carpenter's square. You run your hand over the surface of the freed slab, feeling the cool, satiny texture of the freshly split slate. It is astonishingly smooth, smoother than any surface that could be made by grinding or polishing, because this surface was not made by human hands at all. It was made by the slow, immense pressure of geological time, the weight of millennia pressing down on ancient mud, until the flat, plate-like minerals all aligned themselves in perfect, parallel layers. Your fingertips glide across the stone without any resistance, feeling only the faint, almost imperceptible grain of the rock, a texture so fine it is like touching solidified silk. The stone is cold, drawing the warmth from your skin, and you leave a faint, ghostly trail of heat that fades in seconds, the slate returning to its natural cool temperature. You lean the freed slab carefully against the side of the wooden bed, its weight substantial but manageable, and you turn your attention to the remaining block. The new surface that has been revealed is a perfect mirror image of the underside of the slab you have just removed, smooth and flat and glistening with that same faint, natural moisture. This surface has not seen the light of day since it was first formed, millions of years ago, on the floor of a deep, silent sea. It is marked with delicate, fern-like patterns, traces of ancient minerals that were dissolved in the water and precipitated out as the mud slowly turned to stone. These patterns are called dendrites, and they spread across the surface in thin, black, branching lines that look exactly like the fronds of tiny, fossilized ferns. They are not fossils, not the remains of living things, but the slow chemical crystallization of manganese and iron oxides that have seeped through the rock over unimaginable stretches of time. You pause for a moment to look at these patterns, your eyes tracing the intricate, branching lines. Each one is unique, a singular work of natural art, and you have seen thousands of them in your life. Each one different, each one beautiful in its quiet, accidental way. This one is shaped like a small, delicate tree, its branches spreading outwards and upwards, dividing into ever finer twigs that fade into invisibility at the edges. You will not see this pattern again once the block is split further, because it exists only on this single plane, a secret hidden between the layers of stone, and now it has been revealed and will soon be covered by the next slab in the stack. The block itself is now an inch thinner, its top surface as smooth and flat as the slab you have removed. You inspect this new surface with the same patient attention you gave to the original top, looking for the subtle, diagonal lines of the grain. The cleavage plane continues through the stone, as straight and true as before, promising many more good sheets of roofing slate. You wet your thumb again from the tin cup and draw it across the new surface, watching the moisture darken the stone and then slowly evaporate, revealing the hidden striations. The grain is consistent, the angle unchanged, and there are no new flaws or hard spots that you can detect. The block is sound, and it will yield well. You retrieve your chisels from where they lie on the ground, the thin, fan-shaped blades that you used to open the first seam, and you set them out again on the wooden bed beside the block. The mallet is still in your hand, its handle worn now from your grip, and you take a moment to wipe the head with a scrap of clean rag, removing the fine grey dust that has accumulated in the dents and scratches. The iron rings gleam dully where the dust has been rubbed away, and the beechwood shows its dark, coffee-coloured grain, polished by friction and time. The process begins again, exactly as it did before, a slow, methodical repetition that is the heart of the quarryman's craft. You find the tiny hairline seam on the corner of the block where the next cleavage plane comes closest to the surface, and you set the first chisel into it with the same careful alignment, the same gentle, precise placement. The mallet rises and falls in its familiar rhythm, 3 taps and a pause, 3 taps and a pause, the sound a small, clean clicking that echoes softly against the quarry walls and is swallowed by the vast, open silence. The chisel sinks into the stone, the seam opens, the fine, silvery dust sifts down onto the wooden bed, and the slow, patient work of splitting slate continues beneath the pale, unchanging sky. You work your way around the block, moving the chisel from corner to corner, opening the seam along the entire perimeter. The process is identical to the first split, and yet it is not tedious. There is a quiet satisfaction in the repetition, a calm, meditative quality that comes from doing the same thing over and over, each movement perfected by long practice, each tiny adjustment made without conscious thought. Your hands know this work. They know the weight of the mallet, the angle of the chisel, the sound of a good strike and a bad one. Your mind is free to drift, to settle into the peaceful, empty awareness that comes from rhythmic, manual labor, and you find yourself simply existing in the moment, aware of the cool air, the solid stone, the steady beat of the mallet. The second seam opens more easily than the first, the cleavage plane already established, the stone eager to part along its natural lines. You insert the wedges and work them deeper with the same patient back and forth rhythm, tapping one wedge and then the other, the gap widening slowly, the low creaking sound beginning again deep inside the stone. This time the sound is slightly higher in pitch, the slab being thinner and lighter, and it sings a soft, resonant note as it lifts free. You slide the pry bar into the opening and lean gently on it, and the second slab separates from the block with a smooth, quiet release, the two surfaces sliding apart as easily as 2 pieces of wet paper. You lift this slab onto the rollers and set it aside with the first, the 2 sheets of slate now leaning together against the wooden bed, their smooth surfaces facing each other, their edges perfectly aligned. You pause for a drink of water, lifting the canvas-covered bottle from beside the locker. The water is cool and clean, tasting faintly of the tin cup, and you drink slowly, letting the liquid wash away the fine, dry dust that has settled in your throat. The quarry around you is still perfectly silent, the high walls holding the air as still as water in a deep cistern. The clouds above have shifted almost imperceptibly, their thin white shapes now stretched a little further across the pale blue sky, but the light has not changed, remaining that soft, even, shadowless illumination that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. You set the bottle down and look out across the quarry floor, at the stacks of finished slates, the motionless cranes, the still green pool reflecting the sky. Nothing has moved, nothing has changed. The Sunday quiet is as deep and complete as it was when you arrived, a thick, soft blanket covering the world. You turn back to the block and resume your work. The third split follows the second, and the fourth follows the third, each slab of slate lifting free from the parent stone with a smooth, quiet release. The block grows thinner with each split, its height decreasing by a steady inch at a time, and the stack of freed slabs grows taller beside the wooden bed. The slabs are all of a consistent thickness, each one a perfect, flat sheet of dark grey roofing slate, their surfaces marked here and there with the delicate, fern-like dendrites that are the hidden art of the quarry. Some of the patterns are small and fine, like tiny leafless trees etched with a jeweler's precision. Others are larger and more diffuse, spreading across the surface in soft, cloudy blooms of dark grey and black. Each one is unique, and you glance at them as you lift each slab free, noting the intricate beauty of the designs without pausing in your work. As you work, you become aware of a very slight change in the light. The sun has continued its slow, silent climb behind the thin veil of cloud, and the illumination in the quarry has shifted by a few degrees, the angle of the light now steeper than it was when you began. The shadows, such as they are, have altered almost imperceptibly. The dark line under the wooden bed now slightly shorter, the shadow of the locker now reaching a little further across the slate chippings. This is the only indication of the passage of time, the slow celestial clock, that marks the hours without any need for bells or whistles. The morning is passing, moving with the same slow, steady rhythm as your mallet, and the day is unfolding exactly as it should, without hurry or delay. You split another slab from the block, and then another, the process becoming smoother and easier as you work your way down through the layers. The cleavage planes near the bottom of the block are slightly tighter, the stone having been under more pressure from the weight above, but they yield to the same patient technique, the same gentle, repeated taps of the mallet. You adjust your force very slightly, giving the mallet a fraction more weight on each strike, letting the heavier blows do the work that the stone requires. The sound changes too, becoming a little deeper, a little more solid, as you work into the denser layers near the base of the block. Eventually you reach a point where the remaining stone is too thin to split further, a slab of perhaps 3 inches thick that would not yield a good roofing slate. This is the bottom piece, the offcut that will be set aside for the crusher, to be ground into aggregate for roads and paths. You pry it free with the bar, a heavier, more solid piece than the thin sheets above, and you lift it onto the wooden bed, sliding it to one side. The block is now gone, transformed from a single, solid mass of stone into a stack of a dozen or more thin, flat sheets of roofing slate, each one a potential shield against the rain and snow for some distant roof. You stand back and survey your work, the mallet resting once more at your side, your breathing slow and steady. The stack of slates is neat and orderly, the sheets lying perfectly flat one atop the other, their edges aligned, their surfaces still glistening with the faint, natural moisture of the cleavage planes. The quarry is still silent, the day still young, and the work is not yet done. The thin sheets must now be trimmed and squared, cut down to their final precise dimensions, and there is still a long, quiet afternoon ahead, full of the slow, patient rhythm of the mallet and the chisel. The stack of freshly split slates leans against the wooden bed, their smooth faces catching the soft, diffuse light, and you feel a quiet, natural pause settle over the workspace. It is not a decision you make consciously, but a rhythm your body knows, a slow, internal clock that has been measuring the hours since you first stepped onto the quarry floor. The sun, still hidden behind its thin veil of high cloud, has climbed to its highest point in the pale sky, and the shadows, faint as they are, have drawn themselves up short against the bases of the quarry walls. It is midday, or near enough, and the morning's work is done. You set the mallet down on the wooden bed, its long handle resting against the edge of the remaining off-cut block, and you stretch your arms slowly, feeling the gentle pull in your shoulders, the pleasant, dull ache in the muscles of your forearms and wrists. Your hands, when you look at them, are coated with a fine, silvery-grey dust that has worked its way into every crease and line, outlining the patterns of your skin like a delicate, pale tattoo. You clap your hands together once, twice, and a small cloud of slate dust puffs into the air, hanging for a moment in the stillness before it drifts slowly downwards and settles on the chippings at your feet. The place you choose for your rest is a flat piece of scrap slate that serves as a bench, a slab of dark grey stone, perhaps 3 inches thick and 2 feet square, set against the base of the quarry wall. It has been here for as long as you can remember, a piece of waste that someone, long ago, propped up on 2 smaller stones to make a seat. The surface is smooth and cool, polished not by any tool, but by the friction of countless backs and shoulders over the years, and it has a faint, dark sheen where the natural oils of wool waistcoats and flannel shirts have burnished the stone. You lower yourself onto this seat, your back resting against the cool, solid rock of the quarry wall, and you let out a long, slow breath that you did not know you had been holding. The quarry wall at your back is cool, the chill of the stone seeping slowly through the thickness of your flannel shirt and wool waistcoat, a sensation that is not unpleasant, but grounding, a steady, solid presence that anchors you to the mountain. The stone here is the same dark, blue-grey slate that you have been splitting all morning, its surface rough and natural, marked with the long, straight lines of ancient cleavage planes. There are small patches of pale green lichen growing in the sheltered crevices, and a single delicate, firm frond uncurls from a crack just above your head. Its tiny, perfect leaves are vivid, tender green against the dark rock. You can smell the faint, mineral scent of the stone, the cool, clean smell of damp slate, and beneath it the subtler, earthier scent of the moss and lichen that cling to the shaded places. You reach for the cloth bundle that you set aside when you first arrived, the small, neat package of linen that contains your midday meal. It is still where you left it, on the corner of the wooden locker, the white cloth looking bright against the grey, weathered wood. You lift it and place it on your lap, feeling the modest weight of the food inside, and you begin to unwrap it slowly, untying the simple knot and folding back the corners of the linen one by one. The cloth is soft and worn, washed so many times that it has become thin and supple, and it still holds the faint, clean scent of the kitchen where it was folded, a hint of wood smoke and flour. The food inside is simple, the same meal you have eaten on countless days, yet in this quiet place, with the cool air and the vast silent view, it seems as satisfying as any feast. There are slices of dark bread, their crusts thick and chewy, the crumb a deep nutty brown. The bread was baked yesterday, and it has firmed up overnight, gaining a pleasant, substantial texture that will soften as you chew. Beside the bread, there is a wedge of hard white cheese, its surface smooth and slightly crumbly, beaded here and there with tiny drops of moisture that have seeped out in the cool air. The cheese is mild and salty, made from the milk of the small, hardy sheep that graze on the hillsides, and it has a clean, sharp flavor that cuts through the density of the bread. A small, wrinkled apple, the last from the barrel in the pantry, sits in one corner of the bundle, its skin a dull greenish-yellow patched with faint russet freckles. And there is the enameled tin cup, chipped around the rim, waiting to be filled with water from the canvas-covered bottle. You pour the water carefully, the liquid glugging softly from the bottle's narrow mouth, and you watch it swirl into the cup, clear and cool, catching the pale light. You take a sip, and the water is cold and clean, tasting faintly of the tin cup and of the distant spring from which it was drawn. It washes away the last of the slate dust from your throat, and you feel it travel down into your stomach, a small, cool trickle that spreads a pleasant freshness through your chest. You begin to eat, taking a slice of bread and breaking off a piece of the cheese with your fingers. The bread is dense and slightly sour the way good bread should be, and you chew it slowly, feeling the texture soften on your tongue. The cheese is firm and crumbly, releasing its salty, mild flavor as it warms in your mouth. You take another bite of bread, another piece of cheese, and you eat without hurry, each mouthful chewed long and well, the simple flavors mingling in a quiet, satisfying harmony. There is no need to rush. The afternoon stretches out ahead of you, and the work will wait as patiently as the stone itself. As you eat, your gaze drifts out across the quarry floor and over the edge of the terrace, and you begin to take in the full, sweeping panorama of the valley below. From this height, the world seems laid out like a vast, detailed map, each field and hedge and lane perfectly visible, yet all of it reduced to a miniature scale. The river winds through the valley bottom in a series of gentle looping curves, a ribbon of polished pewter that reflects the pale silvery sky without a single ripple. The water seems not to be moving at all. It is so still, so smooth, that it could be a long, narrow lake, a mirror laid flat between the fields. The fields themselves are a patchwork of greens, each one a slightly different shade depending on the angle of the slope and the type of grass. Some are a pale silvery green where the winter grass is short and fine. Others are a deeper olive green where the soil is richer and the grass grows thicker. Still others are a dark, almost brown green where a field has been recently turned and the bare earth shows through the stubble. The dry stone walls that divide the fields are visible as thin grey lines, snaking up and down the hillsides in long, wandering patterns. From this distance, you cannot see the individual stones, only the continuous grey ribbon of the wall, but you know the texture of those walls intimately, the rough, angular blocks of slate fitted together without mortar, each one chosen and placed by hand, the gaps filled with smaller chippings driven in with the blunt end of a hammer. Some of these walls are ancient, built centuries ago by men whose names are long forgotten, and they have stood through winters of deep snow and gales that howled down the valley, unmoving, as solid as the mountain itself. Beyond the fields and the river, the far side of the valley rises in a series of wooded slopes and open pastures, a great green shoulder of hill that blocks the view of anything beyond. The trees on the lower slopes are mostly bare, their winter branches forming a delicate grey-brown lacework against the pale sky. Higher up, Where the ground is too steep and rocky for trees, the hillside is covered with a rough, tussocky grass and scattered outcrops of dark grey rock, and higher still, near the very top of the ridge, you can see the thin, straight line of an old track, a pale, scarred path that follows the contour of the hill, perhaps an old drove road used by shepherds and their flocks in the days before the quarry was cut. On a distant hillside, perhaps a mile away as the crow flies, a thin trail of chimney smoke rises straight up into the completely still air. The smoke is a pale blue-grey, almost white at the base where it first leaves the chimney, darkening as it climbs and spreads, and it rises in a perfectly vertical column, unswayed by any breeze. It climbs for 100 feet or so, then begins to thin and fray, the edges softening into the surrounding air until, quite suddenly, it is gone, erased like a chalk mark wiped from a board. You watch the smoke for a while, chewing your bread and cheese, and you find your eyes following the column upwards, tracing its slow, gradual dissipation into the pale, empty sky. The apple is the last thing you eat. You take it from the cloth and polish it absently on your sleeve, rubbing the dull skin until it shines with a faint, waxy luster. The first bite is crisp and sharp, the flesh of the apple cracking cleanly between your teeth, releasing a burst of sweet, slightly tart juice. The apple is a little wrinkled, a little soft in places, having spent the winter in the dark of the pantry, but it is still good, still firm enough to crunch, and you eat it slowly, turning it in your hand, biting around the core until only a small fibrous remnant remains. You toss the core gently into a patch of rough grass at the edge of the quarry floor, where it will dry and wither and eventually return to the earth. You pour another cup of water from the bottle and drink it slowly, feeling the cool liquid settle in your stomach, a pleasant heavy fullness that spreads a gentle warmth through your body. The food has done its quiet work, easing the slight, nagging hunger that had begun to make itself known in the last hour of the morning, and you feel a comfortable, drowsy contentment stealing over you. You lean back against the quarry wall, your shoulders settling against the cool, solid stone, and you let your gaze drift out over the valley once more. Far below, the chapel bells begin to ring. The sound arrives after a small, perceptible delay, the bronze notes travelling up the hillside at the pace of sound, and they reach your ears soft and round, mellowed by the distance. The bells ring in a simple, repeating pattern. A chime of 3 notes, followed by a pause, 3 notes and a pause, a rhythm that is not so different from the rhythm of your mallet on the chisel. The notes are clear and pure, each one a distinct bell-like tone that hangs in the still air for a long moment before it fades, and as you listen, you can almost see the ropes being pulled in the little chapel tower, the bells swinging in their dark wooden frames, the sound waves spreading out in invisible concentric circles across the valley. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. The chapel bells are a Sunday sound, a sound that has been part of this valley for centuries, and they carry with them a sense of quiet order, of ritual and rest. When the bells fall silent, the quiet that follows seems deeper than before, a thick, velvet hush that settles over the quarry like a second blanket. You open your eyes and the view is still there, unchanged, the river still a pewter ribbon, the fields still a green patchwork, the smoke trail still rising from the distant chimney. The silence up here on the quarry shelf is so profound that you become aware of the smallest, nearest sounds. A tiny rustle, no louder than a whisper, draws your attention downwards, and you see a beetle making its slow way across the slate chippings near your boot. It is a small black insect, its carapace shiny and domed, its legs moving with a patient mechanical determination as it navigates the jagged terrain of the broken stone. It climbs over a small, sharp fragment of slate, balancing for a moment on the peak, then descends the other side and continues on its way, heading towards the dark shelter of the quarry wall. You watch it for as long as it remains in sight, following its slow, laborious progress with a quiet, idle attention, and when it finally disappears into a crevice, you let your gaze return to the wide, distant view. A single bird appears in the pale sky, a dark, cross-shaped silhouette that floats on the motionless air. It is some kind of hawk, perhaps a buzzard, its wings outstretched and utterly still as it rides an invisible thermal, and it circles slowly, drifting in a wide, lazy spiral above the valley. It does not flap its wings. It simply glides, tilting slightly to one side, then righting itself, its shadow gliding across the fields far below, a tiny dark speck that races over the green patches and the grey walls. You watch the bird for a long minute, following its slow, graceful circuits, and then it slides away over the shoulder of the hill and is gone, leaving the sky empty and still once more. The rest time passes not in minutes but in a slow, gentle flow, a quiet, elongated moment that has no clear beginning or end. You are not aware of being tired or restless. You are simply here, sitting on a slab of slate, your back against the mountain, your stomach full, your eyes resting on the familiar, beloved landscape. The air is cool but not cold, the light is soft but not dim, and the silence is deep but not empty. It is filled with the small, quiet presences of the world, the distant hiss of the waterfall, the faint, clean scent of damp stone, the tiny, almost inaudible whisper of the breeze that has finally stirred, just enough to ruffle the dry fronds of the bracken on the hillside above. You do not know how long you sit there, and it does not matter. Sunday is a day outside of time, a day when the clocks seem to run slower, when the sun hangs in the sky for just a little longer than it should, and you are content to let the rest take as long as it needs. Your hands, now clean of the slate dust, rest loosely in your lap, the palms upturned, the fingers slightly curled, still holding the memory of the mallet's weight. Your breathing is slow and deep, each inhalation drawing in the cool, clean air, each exhalation a soft, quiet sigh that merges with the stillness. Eventually, without any signal or decision, the rest comes to its natural end. It is simply time to resume, time to stand and stretch, and return to the wooden bed and the waiting slabs of slate. You fold the empty cloth and tuck it into your pocket, the linen soft and warm from your lap. You pour the last of the water from the bottle into the tin cup and drink it down, the final cool swallow marking the conclusion of the meal. And then you rise from the stone bench, your joints protesting mildly, a faint stiffness in your knees and back that will ease once you start moving again. You stand for a moment looking out at the valley one last time, the view unchanged, the river still a pewter ribbon, the fields still a green patchwork, the chapel now silent, its bells put away until next Sunday. Then you turn back towards the wooden bed, where the stack of split slates waits for your hands, and the quarry receives you again into its deep, patient, Sunday silence. The rest time ends not with a signal, but with a natural, quiet shift, the same way a leaf settles onto still water. You rise from the stone bench, your body moving without hurry, and you stand for a moment feeling the cool solidity of the quarry floor beneath your boots. The midday meal has done its gentle work, and you feel a comfortable, steady energy, the kind that comes from simple food eaten in the open air. Your hands, now free of the slate dust, open and close slowly, working out the slight stiffness that is gathered in the knuckles during the rest. You walk back across the quarry floor towards your workspace, your boots crunching rhythmically on the broken chippings. The sound is as familiar to you as your own breathing, a steady, dry percussion that marks your progress across the vast grey amphitheatre. The quarry is still utterly silent, the high walls still holding the cool, still air, the cranes still motionless against the pale sky, their iron arms dark and patient. The green pool of the lowest point still reflects the clouds with perfect fidelity, its surface unbroken by any ripple, and the stacks of finished slates still stand in their orderly rows like silent grey soldiers. Nothing has changed. The Sunday quiet is as deep and complete as it was in the morning, a thick, soft presence that wraps around everything and holds it still. You reach the wooden bed where the stack of split slabs leans against the timber frame. The slabs are as you left them, their smooth, freshly split surfaces still holding the faint, natural moisture of the cleavage planes. You run your hand over the topmost slab, feeling the cool, satiny texture, the perfect flatness that no grinding or polishing could ever achieve. The stone is a deep blue-grey, the colour of a winter sea, and it is marked here and there with the delicate, fern-like patterns of manganese dendrites, those tiny, branching, accidental works of art that are the hidden signature of the quarry. The next phase of the work is different from the first. The morning was about splitting, about coaxing the thick, heavy block apart along its natural planes to produce thin, flat sheets. The afternoon is about trimming, about cutting those large, irregular sheets down to their final, precise dimensions, the sizes of roofing slates that have been standard in this valley for generations. You will need a gauge, a simple wooden template that you will use to mark the lines, and you do not have one ready. This is a small task, a quiet preparation, and you turn to the wooden locker to find what you need. Inside the locker, beneath the chisels and the spare wedges, there is a small stack of thin, wooden laths, offcuts from some long-forgotten carpentry job. You select one that is straight and true, its grain running the length of the wood without any knots or twists. It is perhaps 18 inches long and 2 inches wide. A strip of pale, seasoned pine that has darkened to a warm honey color with age. You also take out a short, stubby pencil, its lead worn to a blunt, rounded point, and a small folding ruler made of boxwood, its brass hinges polished smooth by use. You sit on the edge of the wooden bed, the lath across your knees, and you begin to measure and mark. The ruler unfolds with a soft clicking sound, the boxwood segments locking into place, and you lay it along the lath, squinting at the tiny engraved numbers. You mark a line at 12 inches, then another at 10, then another at 8. These are the standard widths of the roofing slates, the largest ones for the eaves, the middle size for the main courses, the smallest for the ridge. You have cut these dimensions so many times that your hands could mark them in the dark, but you measure carefully nevertheless, checking each line against the ruler, making sure everything is exact. When the marks are made, you take a small fine-toothed saw from the locker and cut the lath at each line, producing 3 short, neat pieces of wood. Each piece becomes a simple gauge, a template that you will use to score the slates. You test each one against the edge of a slab, checking that the corners are square, that the length is true. The wood is smooth and dry, warm in your hand, and it smells faintly of the pine resin that still lingers after all these years. You set the gauges on the wooden bed beside the stack of slabs, and you survey the workspace, making sure everything is in order. The chisels are laid out in their row, their steel blades gleaming dully. The mallet rests on the bed, its long handle extending over the edge. The wedges and the pry bar are set to one side, ready if needed. The tin cup and the water bottle stand on the corner of the locker, and the cloth bundle, now empty and folded, is tucked into your pocket. Everything is in its place, and you are ready to begin the slow, methodical work of the afternoon. You lift the first large slab from the stack, easing it onto the wooden bed so that it lies flat and stable. The slab is roughly rectangular, its edges sharp and clean from the morning's splitting, but it is not yet square, and its dimensions are larger than any standard roofing slate. You take the largest of the 3 wooden gauges, the 12-inch piece, and you lay it along one edge of the slab, aligning it carefully. Then you take the stubby pencil and draw a line along the gauge, the graphite leaving a faint silvery mark on the dark surface of the stone. The line is straight and true, a precise guide for the chisel that will follow. You move the gauge along the edge and mark another line, then another, working your way across the slab, dividing the large irregular sheet into smaller rectangles. Each mark is a small, quiet scratch of graphite on slate, a sound so faint it is barely audible. When the slab is fully marked, you set the pencil aside and pick up a straight edge, a long, flat piece of steel that you use to check your lines. You lay the straight edge along each mark, squinting along its length, making sure that everything is aligned, that the rectangles will be square and true, the lines are good, and you are satisfied. The trimming itself is a different technique from the splitting. Instead of opening a seam along the natural cleavage plane, you are now cutting across the grain, breaking the slate along lines that you have chosen rather than lines that nature provided. This requires a lighter touch, a smaller, more precise chisel, and a different rhythm with the mallet. You select a narrow-bladed chisel from the row, a tool with a cutting edge perhaps 2 inches wide, its steel thin and sharp, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless similar cuts. You position the chisel on the first graphite line, its edge aligned with the mark, and you begin to tap gently with the mallet, a series of light, precise strikes that send tiny vibrations through the stone. The sound of this trimming work is higher and sharper than the sound of the splitting, a series of quick, bright taps that ring softly against the quarry walls. The chisel bites into the slate, scoring a fine shallow groove along the graphite line, and you work your way along the mark with the same patient, methodical rhythm. Tap, move the chisel a fraction, tap again. The groove deepens. A thin, dark line that cuts across the grey surface of the slab. A defined silvery dust rises from the cut, settling on your hands and the wooden bed. When the groove is deep enough, you set the chisel aside and position the slab so that the scored line hangs just over the edge of the wooden bed. You place a thin wooden batten under the slab, aligning it with the groove, and then you press down gently but firmly on the overhanging piece. The slate breaks cleanly along the scored line with a soft, crisp, snapping sound, the two pieces separating as neatly as a biscuit, broken along its perforation. The edge of the cut is straight and clean, not as smooth as the natural cleavage surface, but square and true, exactly following the line you marked. You lift the cut piece and set it on a new stack, a pile that is beginning to form on the other side of the wooden bed. This stack is different from the stack of rough slabs. These are the finished slates, or nearly finished, their edges trimmed square, their dimensions matching the wooden gauge. You take the offcut, the remaining piece of the original slab, and you turn it over, inspecting its surface for any flaws. The stone is sound, the grain consistent, and you lay it flat again and pick up the next gauge, the 10-inch piece, ready to mark and cut the next rectangle. The work settles into a calm, steady pattern, a rhythm that flows without pause. You mark the slate with the gauge and pencil, you score the line with the chisel and mallet, you snap the piece clean along the groove, and you set the finished slate on the growing stack. Then you turn the offcut, measure again, score again, snap again. The cycle repeats over and over, each repetition slightly different. Each piece of slate a unique individual rectangle of dark grey stone. But the process itself is a single continuous flow, a quiet, meditative current that carries you through the afternoon. The stack of finished slates grows slowly, one piece at a time. Each slate makes a soft papery clack as you place it on the pile, the sound of stone on stone, a dull, dry note that is somehow satisfying. The slates are of different sizes, the largest at the bottom of the stack, the smaller ones above, and you arrange them neatly, their edges aligned, their corners square. The pile rises steadily, a monument to the slow, patient work of the afternoon, and you pause occasionally to straighten the stack, nudging a slate into alignment with its neighbors, making sure everything is orderly and true. The offcuts that remain after all the rectangles have been cut are small, irregular pieces of slate, some triangular, some trapezoidal, none of them large enough to make a roofing slate. You set these aside in a separate pile, the scrap that will be taken to the crusher and ground into aggregate. Even these offcuts have a certain rough beauty, their edges sharp and angular, their surfaces marked with the same delicate dendrites and subtle color variations as the finished slates. You handle them gently, placing them in the scrap pile with the same care you give to the good pieces, because they are all part of the same stone, all products of the same ancient seafloor, and they deserve the same quiet respect. As you work, you become aware of a very slight change in the quality of the light. The sun has begun its long, slow descent, though it is still high enough that the change is barely perceptible, more a feeling than a visible fact. The light has thinned by a fraction, losing a little of its warmth, taking on a cooler, more silvery quality. The shadows, which have been short and faint all day, have begun to lengthen almost imperceptibly, stretching out from the bases of the quarry walls and the stacks of finished slates. The air, too, has changed, the temperature dropping by a single, subtle degree. A hint of the evening chill that will come later, but is not yet here. Your hands have acquired a new coating of the fine, silvery dust, the residue of the scored lines and the snapped edges. The dust is even finer than the dust from the splitting, a soft, pale powder that sifts into every crease and crevice of your skin, outlining the ridges of your fingerprints, gathering in the folds of your knuckles. When you rub your thumb against your forefinger, you can feel the microscopic grittiness of the slate particles, a sensation as fine as talcum powder, and you pause occasionally to blow the dust from your hands. A soft, quick breath that sends a tiny grey cloud drifting into the still air. The rhythm of the work continues, steady and unhurried. You mark and score and snap, mark and score and snap, the wooden gauges growing warm in your hand, the chisel blade wearing a faint grey patina from the constant contact with the stone. Each finished slate is inspected briefly as you place it on the stack, your eyes scanning the surface for any hidden flaw, any small crack or irregularity that might weaken the piece. Most are perfect, the straight, even grain-producing clean, sharp edges and smooth, flat surfaces. Occasionally you find a piece with a small flaw, a tiny white vein of quartz running through the stone, and you set these aside in a separate pile. The seconds that will be sold at a lower price, or used for smaller, less critical work. The afternoon wears on, the sun sliding slowly down the pale sky, and you continue to work with the same patient, steady pace. You do not count the slates as you cut them, do not measure your progress by numbers. You simply work, your hands moving through the familiar motions, your mind settled into a quiet, peaceful blankness, aware of the cool air and the solid stone and the soft, rhythmic sounds of the mallet and chisel. The quarry around you is still silent, still empty, still wrapped in its Sunday stillness, and you are content to be a part of that stillness, a small, quiet figure working alone in the vast grey amphitheatre, turning rough slabs of ancient mudstone into neat, orderly stacks of roofing slate. The last square of slate settles onto the neat pile with a soft, dry clack, the sound of stone meeting stone, a small final note that marks the end of the afternoon's work. You stand back and look at the stack, your hands resting on your hips, your breath slow and even. The finished slates are arranged in orderly rows, their edges aligned, their corners square, their smooth blue-grey surfaces catching the thin, silvery light. There are many of them now, a full day's yield from a single, well-chosen block, and they sit on the wooden bed like a small, grey monument to patience and steady hands. The offcuts, the small, irregular pieces that could not be cut into roofing slates, have been gathered into a neat pile beside the wooden bed. Some are thin, triangular slivers with sharp, angular points. Others are chunky, rectangular blocks, the remnants of the edges and corners. Still others are simply odd shapes, trapezoids and parallelograms of dark grey stone, their surfaces smooth on one side and rough on the other. You pick up a piece from the top of the pile, a thin, wedge-shaped sliver that fits in the palm of your hand, and you weigh it for a moment, feeling its cool, solid heft. This piece is too thin to split further, too irregular to trim into anything useful, and so you place it gently into a wooden crate that sits beside the locker, a crate destined for the crusher, where it will be ground into aggregate for roads and paths. It will serve its purpose, this small, odd piece of slate, just as every piece of the block has served its purpose, and you set it down with the same quiet care you have given to the finest roofing slate. The work is done, but the day is not quite over. There is a final ritual to perform, a slow, methodical tidying that is as much a part of the craft as the splitting and the trimming. You turn to the wooden locker and begin to gather your tools, handling each one with the same quiet, familiar respect you have shown all day. The chisels are the first to be cleaned. You take a piece of clean rag from the locker, a square of old soft cotton that has been used for this purpose many times before, and you pour a few drops of light machine oil onto the cloth, the oil releasing a faint, pleasant scent that is both sharp and sweet. You pick up the first chisel, the narrow-bladed one you used for scoring the trim lines, and you white the blade carefully, drawing the oiled cloth along the steel from the handle to the edge. The grey, silvery dust comes away easily, leaving the metal clean and bright, and the oil leaves a thin, protective film that will keep the steel from rusting in the damp quarry air. You inspect the edge, holding the chisel up to the pale light, and you see that it is still sharp and true, ready for the next day's work. Each chisel receives the same attention, the oiled cloth drawn slowly along the blade, the edge inspected, the wooden handle wiped clean of dust and sweat. You work through the row methodically, from the narrowest chisel to the widest, and as each one is cleaned, you lay it back into its shaped wooden cradle in the locker. The cradles are simple, carved recesses in a block of pine, each one shaped to hold a specific chisel, and the tools settle into them with a soft, snug fit. The steel blades gleam dully in the dim interior of the locker, their edges aligned, their handles nested side by side like sleeping companions. The wedges come next, the thick, angled pieces of steel that you use to pry the layers apart. They are coated with a heavier layer of dust, the fine grey powder having worked its way into every corner and crevice, and you wipe them down more thoroughly, turning them over in your hands, making sure every surface is clean and oiled. The iron of the wedges is darker than the chisel steel, a deep, blackish grey with faint, mottled patches of old rust, and the oil brings out a subtle, dark luster that is almost beautiful. You set the wedges into their places in the locker, and then you take out the pry bar, the long, flat piece of iron that you use to lift the freed slabs. The bar is heavy, and you wipe it down with long, sweeping strokes of the oily rag, cleaning the flat blade and the rounded handle, removing every trace of the stone dust. The mallet is the last tool to be cleaned, and you give it a particular, unhurried attention. You wipe the handle first, drawing the oiled cloth along the smooth hickory from end to end, removing the faint grey residue of slate dust that has accumulated in the tiny pores of the wood. The oil soaks into the hickory, darkening it slightly, bringing out the warm golden brown color and the fine parallel lines of the grain. You turn the mallet over and inspect the head, the cylinder of beech wood bound with iron rings. The dents and scars on the head are more visible now that the dust has been wiped away, a dense overlapping pattern of tiny, shallow craters that cover the striking surface like the surface of an old, worn cobblestone. You run your thumb over one of the iron rings, feeling the cool, smooth metal, the faint, silky texture of the ancient rust. The mallet is an old tool, older than you are, and it has been cared for with this same patient ritual for decades, and it will continue to serve for decades more. You place the mallet into the locker, its long handle resting in a pair of wooden brackets, its heavy head suspended clear of the bottom. The locker is now full, all the tools in their proper places, the steel gleaming faintly with oil, the wood warm and clean. You close the lid gently, the iron hinge giving a soft, low groan, and you slide the hasp into place, though you do not lock it. There is no need for a lock-up here, in this high, quiet place where no one comes on a Sunday. The next part of the tidying is the broom. You take a twig broom from its place behind the locker, a simple tool made of a bundle of birch twigs bound tightly to a rough wooden handle. The twigs are dry and brittle, their bark a pale, silvery brown, and they make a soft rustling sound as you lift the broom. The handle is worn smooth at the grip, the wood darkened by the oils of your hand, and it fits your palm as naturally as the mallet handle. You begin to sweep the workspace, drawing the broom across the wooden bed and the area of ground around it in long, steady strokes. The bristles of the broom make a gentle, hushed shushing sound as they pass over the slate chippings, a soft, rhythmic noise that is as calming as the sound of the stream. The fine, silvery dust rises in small, pale clouds, drifting lazily in the still air before settling back to the ground a little further away. You sweep the dust and the small, loose chippings into a neat pile beside the scrap crate, the pile growing slowly as you work your way around the workspace. There are small fragments of slate everywhere, thin, sharp slivers from the trimming, tiny, angular pieces from the splitting, the fine, powdery residue that has accumulated over the course of the day. You sweep them all into the pile with the same patient, unhurried motion, the broom moving back and forth in a steady, calming rhythm. When the pile is complete, you scoop it up with a small flat shovel and tip it into the scrap crate with the offcuts. The dust and chippings slide off the shovel with a soft, rattling sound, a tiny avalanche of grey stone that settles into the gaps between the larger pieces. You sweep the area one more time, catching the last few fragments, and then you prop the broom back in its place, the birch twigs splayed against the quarry wall, the handle leaning at a comfortable angle. The finished stack of roofing slates is the last thing to be tidied, and you take a sheet of old canvas from the locker, a heavy, stiff piece of fabric that is patched and stained, but still serviceable. You unfold it slowly, the canvas releasing a faint, musty scent of old dust and damp, and you drape it over the stack of slates, covering them completely. The canvas hangs down over the edges of the stack, and you place a few small, heavy stones on the corners to weight it down, to keep the wind from lifting it if a breeze should rise in the night. The canvas will protect the slates from any rain or dew, keeping them clean and dry until they can be taken down to the mill for final finishing. You step back and survey your workspace. The wooden bed is clear of tools and debris, its surface swept clean, showing only the dark, oil-stained timber and the faint, pale scratches left by the chisels. The ground around the bed is similarly clean, the slate chippings swept smooth, the scrap crate neatly filled. The canvas-covered stack of finished slates sits squarely on the bed, its grey, weathered cover looking like a small, tidy tent. You feel a quiet, unhurried satisfaction, not a feeling of pride or accomplishment, but simply the calm, steady awareness of a job done well, of everything in its proper place. You stand for a long minute, your hands resting loosely at your sides, your gaze drifting across the quarry floor. The light has changed noticeably now, the sun having slipped behind the shoulder of the western ridge, and the entire quarry is settling into a soft, cool twilight. The air has taken on a faint evening chill, a slight, damp coolness that rises from the stone and seeps into your skin. The quarry walls, which have been pale grey all day, are now a deeper, darker grey, their faces shadowed and still. The green pool at the bottom of the quarry is no longer reflecting the sky. The surface is a dark, opaque green, still perfectly calm, but now holding the dim, muted light of the evening rather than the bright, silvery light of the afternoon. A single bird flies silently across the pale sky, a dark, swift shape that cuts straight across the quarry from one side to the other, its wings beating with a quick, steady rhythm. You watch it disappear over the eastern wall, and then the sky is empty again, the pale blue deepening very slowly towards the first hint of dusk. You shake the last of the slate dust from your hands, clapping them together gently, the fine grey powder drifting down to join the chippings at your feet. Then you brush down your trousers and your waistcoat, your hands moving automatically, the familiar end-of-day motion that you have performed thousands of times. The dust comes away in small grey puffs, and when you are satisfied that you are reasonably clean, you pick up the empty water bottle and the tin cup and place them into a small canvas bag that hangs from a nail on the locker. You close the locker one final time, pressing the lid down firmly, making sure the hasp is secure. The wood is cool and rough under your hand, the grey, weathered surface holding the faint, lingering scent of oil and stone dust. You pat the locker once, a small habitual gesture that is almost a goodbye, and then you turn away. The walk back across the quarry floor is a slow, quiet journey. Your boots crunch on the slate chippings with the same dry, brittle sound, but the sound seems softer now, more muffled, as if the approaching evening is pressing down on the world and subduing all its noises. The stacks of finished slates that you pass are growing shadowy and indistinct, their sharp edges softening in the fading light. The cranes, still motionless, are now dark, angular silhouettes against the pale sky, their iron arms looking like the spars of some ancient abandoned ship. You reach the beginning of the tramway path, the wide, inclined ramp that will take you back down to the village, and you pause for a moment, turning to look back at the quarry one last time. The high grey walls are dark now, their faces shadowed and still, and the floor is a flat, pale expanse of broken stone. The canvas-covered stack of slates is a small pale shape against the quarry wall, and the locker is a dark, square shadow tucked into the corner. The whole scene is utterly silent, utterly still, a vast, man-made hollow carved into the mountain, and it seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the night to come. You turn and face the path, the valley below already in shadow, the western sky above the ridge still glowing with a soft, muted orange light that will fade soon into the deep, calm blue of dusk. You begin to walk down the incline, your pace as slow and steady as it was on the way up, your body tired but content, your mind as quiet and peaceful as the evening around you. The tramway path lies before you, a pale descending ribbon of packed earth and rusted iron that cuts down the darkening hillside. You take the first step onto the incline, your boots finding the familiar footholds between the rails, and you begin the slow, steady walk down towards the valley. The descent feels different from the ascent, your body leaning back slightly against the pull of gravity, your knees absorbing the gentle, repetitive impact of each downward step. The muscles that work to lift you up the hill now work to lower you down, a different kind of exertion, softer and more controlled. The light has changed profoundly since you last walked this path. The sun has slipped behind the western ridge, and the entire valley is settling into a soft, cool twilight. The sky above is still pale, a wash of thin, silvery blue that holds the memory of the day, but the land below is already in shadow, the fields and hedgerows darkening into muted, indistinct shapes. The higher slice of the eastern ridge opposite still glows with a warm, muted orange, a final, luminous gift from the sun that has already set. And you watch this glow as you walk, seeing it slowly fade from orange to gold to a pale, lemony yellow, the colors shifting through the spectrum as the evening deepens. The air has changed as well. It is cooler now, damper, carrying the first faint hint of the night mist that will gather in the valley bottom before morning. You can feel the moisture on your cheeks, a cool, soft touch that is barely there, and you can smell the new, fresh scent of evening, the smell of cooling grass and damp earth, and the faint, clean perfume of the stream somewhere below. The mineral tang of the quarry has faded behind you, and in its place comes the homelier scent of the valley, wood smoke and hay, and the dark, peaty aroma of the wet fields. You walk slowly, your pace unhurried, your body moving with the same steady rhythm that has carried you through the entire day. The descent requires less effort than the climb, and you find yourself drifting into a calm, reflective quiet, your mind not thinking any particular thoughts but simply absorbing the details of the path as they pass. The iron rails beside your feet are the same color as the darkening sky, their rusted surfaces now a deep velvety brown rather than the bright orange they showed in the morning light. The grass between the sleepers has lost its crispness, the blades drooping slightly as the evening moisture gathers on them. The dandelions have closed their yellow heads, the petals folding inwards for the night, forming tight green-sheathed buds that will open again when the sun returns. You pass the great projecting outcrop of rock where you paused on the way up, the tall, smooth face of slate that rises beside the path. In the morning, this rock was cool and damp, its surface gleaming with a thin film of moisture. Now it is dark and shadowed, a massive grey-black shape that looms silently against the pale sky, and the crevices and ledges that were visible in the daylight are now hidden in deep velvet shadow. The small pool at its base, where the water dripped with a steady, liquid plink, is now a dark circular mirror, reflecting the pale sky with a faint silvery gleam. The dripping continues, the same slow, rhythmic sound, each drop falling with a soft, musical note that seems louder now in the quiet of the evening. You continue down, passing the flat, grassy shoulder where you stop to look at the valley view. The shoulder is still there, the same wide-open shelf of grass and rock, but the view has changed entirely. Where in the morning there was a lake of white mist and layers of green hills touched with golden light, there is now a deepening blue-grey dusk, the fields and walls and hedgerows merging into a single, soft, shadowy tapestry. The village is no longer a cluster of grey roofs, but a handful of tiny, warm sparks, the first lamps of the evening glowing in cottage windows, their light a soft golden orange that seems almost impossibly bright against the darkening land. You count them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4 small squares of light, each one a sign of a kitchen where a kettle is heating or a table is being laid for a simple Sunday supper. The sound of the hidden waterfall, which accompanied you on the ascent, is still there, a steady, white noise that threads through the still air. It seems closer now, perhaps because the evening air is denser and carries sound differently, or perhaps because the general quiet has deepened and the waterfall is one of the few remaining voices in the landscape. It hisses and rustles behind its screen of hawthorn and rowan, a constant, soothing presence that you have known all your life, and you let the sound wash over you as you walk, a gentle, liquid counterpart to the dry crunch of your boots. The path continues its steady descent, curving around the shoulder of the hill, and now the quarry is out of sight, hidden behind the shoulder of rock. You are back in the world of the lower hills, the steep, grassy slopes and the dark, tangled bracken, and you can feel the closeness of the valley floor approaching. The dry stone walls that line the path are dark shapes now, their individual stones invisible, the walls themselves looking like long grey snakes winding down the hillside. The moss on the walls has deepened in colour, the emerald green of the morning turning to a dark, velvety black green in the dusk. A dog barks somewhere below, a single distant woof that echoes softly against the hillside, and then fades into silence. The sound is homely and ordinary, a reminder that the village is still there, still living its quiet, Sunday life, and you find it comforting. A door closes with a distant wooden thud, the sound travelling up the hillside with the same slight delay as the chapel bells in the morning, arriving soft and muted. Someone is going inside, shutting out the cool evening air, settling in for the night. You imagine the warmth of the kitchen, the glow of the oil lamp, the steam rising from a pot on the range, and the image is pleasant, a quiet anticipation of your own return. You pass the place where the lane meets the tramway, the spot where you turned off this morning, and you step from the inclined path onto the level ground of the lane. The transition feels significant, a return to the ordinary world after a day spent in the high, quiet realm of the quarry. The lane is narrow and dark, bordered by the same high walls cushioned with thick moss, and your boots make a different sound now, a softer, duller thud on the packed earth rather than the sharp crunch of slate chippings. The stream runs beside the lane, the same narrow channel of clear water that you passed in the morning, but now it is a dark, liquid ribbon, its surface catching the faint, last light of the sky and turning it into a moving, glimmering thread. You pause by the stream for a moment, looking down at the water as it flows over its bed of smooth grey stones. The water is still clear, but in the dusk it has taken on a deep, mysterious quality. The stones at the bottom visible only as dark, rounded shapes. The waterweeds sway gently in the current, their dark, waving forms like the hair of some submerged, sleeping creature. The sound of the stream is a constant, liquid whisper, a soft, continuous conversation that has been going on for 1,000 years and will continue for 1,000 more. You stand and listen, letting the sound fill your ears, and then you continue on your way. The lane curves to the right, and now the village appears before you, a cluster of dark, slate-roofed cottages huddled together in the valley bottom. The lights in the windows are more numerous now, warm, golden squares that glow against the dark stone walls, and you can see the faint blue-grey wisps of smoke rising from the chimneys, the smoke barely visible against the darkening sky. The chapel is still there, its small square tower a dark solid shape against the pale western sky, and it stands silent and still, the bells put away until next Sunday, the doors closed, the congregation scattered to their homes. You walk through the village, your boots making a soft, steady rhythm on the lane. The cottages are quiet, their curtains drawn, their gardens dark shapes of bare earth and dormant plants. A cat slips across the lane in front of you, a dark, silent shape that moves with a fluid, unhurried grace, and it disappears into the shadow of a wall without a sound. You pass the gate where you paused this morning, the one that hangs slightly askew on its iron hinges, and you lift the latch with the same familiar, gritty scrape, the sound louder now in the quiet of the evening. Your own cottage stands at the end of the row, its stone walls dark and solid, its slate roof a dark, angled plane against the sky. The kitchen window glows with a soft, warm light, the oil lamp already lit and waiting, and a thin trail of smoke rises from the chimney, the sign of a fire that has been tended in your absence. You open the door, the wood cool and smooth under your hand, and you step inside, closing it softly behind you. The kitchen is warm, the range ticking softly in the corner, its iron heart glowing a dull, friendly red. The oil lamp sits on the table, its flame a steady yellow teardrop that pushes the shadows back into the corners, and the room is filled with the familiar, comforting sense of wood smoke and bread, and the faint, clean smell of stone. A kettle rests on the edge of the range, its surface dark with age, and a small blue flame flickers beneath it, the water just beginning to murmur with the first soft sounds of approaching heat. You hang your cap on its peg beside the door and slip off your boots, standing them neatly against the wall. Your feet feel light and free in their thick, woolen socks, and you pad across the flagstones to the table, sinking into the wooden chair with a long, slow sigh. The day is over, the work is done, and the quiet of the cottage wraps around you like a familiar blanket. You sit for a while, your hands resting on the smooth, worn surface of the table, your eyes watching the flame of the lamp as it burns with a steady, unwavering light. The kettle begins to hum, a low, soft sound that rises slowly in pitch, and you listen to it, letting the sound fill your mind. Outside, the valley has settled into the deep, calm silence of a Sunday night, a silence that has existed long before the quarry was cut and will remain long after. The stream whispers, the waterfall hisses in the distance, and the stars, hidden behind the thin veil of cloud, wheel slowly overhead. You pour a cup of tea from the kettle, the steam rising in a lazy ribbon, and you sit in the warm, quiet kitchen, your body at rest, your mind as still and peaceful as the stone that waits for you in the high, silent quarry above.